Before science, before biology, before satellites and microscopes, humans still tried to understand the world around them, and when they encountered something they could not explain, they did not call it unknown, they gave it a face, a body, and a name. Monsters were not entertainment. They were explanations. To ancient people, monsters were real creatures that lived in mountains, oceans, forests, and deserts beyond human control. Dragons were not symbols, they were animals. Giants were not metaphors, they were ancient beings that once walked the earth. Cyclopes were not stories. They were creatures whose bones people believed they had seen. The ancient world was filled with monsters because the ancient world was vast, unexplored, and dangerous. When sailors vanished at sea, it was not bad weather, it was a kraken. When villages disappeared in mountains, it was not erosion or earthquakes, it was giants. When strange bones were found in caves, they were not fossils, they were remains of monsters. One of the most widespread examples is the dragon. Nearly every ancient civilization had some version of a dragon, from Europe to China to the Middle East. These dragons were not identical, but they shared key traits: enormous size, reptilian features, and immense power. In Europe, dragons were winged, fire-breathing predators that guarded treasure. In China, dragons were long, serpentine creatures associated with rivers, storms, and the sky. Ancient people did not see this as coincidence. They believed dragons were real animals that lived in remote places. Roman naturalists wrote about dragons as if they were rare but real species. Medieval maps marked dragon territories the same way they marked mountains or deserts. One possible explanation is fossils. Large dinosaur bones exposed by erosion would have looked unmistakably monstrous. A skull the size of a cartwheel, ribs longer than spears, teeth larger than knives. Without knowledge of extinct animals, the logical conclusion was dragons. Another possibility is large reptiles, crocodiles, giant snakes, and monitor lizards would have appeared almost mythical to people who rarely encountered them. Stories grow as they travel. Each retelling makes the creature larger, deadlier, more supernatural. Another famous example is the cyclopes. In Greek mythology, cyclopes were one-eyed giants who lived in caves and mountains. For centuries, people believed these creatures had once existed. The belief likely came from skulls of extinct dwarf elephants found in caves across the Mediterranean. These skulls have a large central nasal cavity that looks exactly like a single massive eye socket. To ancient people, this was undeniable proof. A giant, one-eyed creature had lived there. The skull was real. The bones were real. Only the interpretation was wrong, to them. The cyclops was not myth, it was anatomy. Sea monsters were perhaps the most feared of all. The ocean was vast, dark, and unpredictable. Sailors disappeared regularly. Ships were destroyed without warning. Ancient people filled that uncertainty with creatures like the kraken, a massive beast said to drag entire ships beneath the waves. Norse sailors described it as large as an island. They believed they had seen it. In reality, giant squids exist. They can reach enormous sizes, have eyes larger than dinner plates, and inhabit deep waters. When one surfaced or attacked a ship, even briefly, it would have been interpreted as a monster. Add fear, darkness, and survival panic, and the story becomes legendary. Ancient maps often showed sea serpents coiled around ships, not as decoration, but as warnings. Here be monsters meant something literal. Another creature believed to be real was the giant. Nearly every culture has myths of enormous humanoid beings. The Bible describes the Nephilim. Greek myths speak of titans. Norse legends describe frost giants. These were not symbolic figures. Ancient people believed giants were a previous race that existed before modern humans. They explained massive stone structures, huge weapons found in the ground, and oversized bones, in some cases. Mammoth and mastodon bones were interpreted as giant skeletons. Imagine discovering a thigh bone taller than a man. The idea that it belonged to an animal would not come naturally if you had never seen such animals alive. To ancient minds, it belonged to a giant. Even medieval scholars wrote about giants as historical beings, not myths. Monsters also served as explanations for dangerous animals. Lions, bears, wolves, and large cats were often exaggerated into supernatural creatures. The manticore, described as a lion with a human face and scorpion tail, may have been based on travelers' descriptions of tigers or unfamiliar predators. When language barriers exist, descriptions become distorted, add fear, and the animal becomes a monster. The basilisk, a creature said to kill with a glance, may have been inspired by venomous snakes whose bite caused sudden death. To ancient observers, the speed of death seemed magical. Monsters also explain disease and psychological phenomena. Creatures like vampires and ghouls were believed to be real beings that fed on humans. In many cases, these myths were responses to unexplained illnesses, decomposition of bodies, and outbreaks of disease. Corpses that bloated or moved due to gases were believed to be undead. Again, the monster was not fantasy. It was an explanation based on limited knowledge. What is important to understand is that ancient people did not believe in monsters because they were stupid. They believed in monsters because monsters made sense in a world without scientific frameworks. Monsters gave shape to fear. They provided reasons. They created boundaries. If a forest was haunted by a creature, you avoided it. If the sea was ruled by monsters, you respected it. Monsters enforced survival rules. Over time, as science expanded and exploration filled the blank spaces on maps, monsters slowly retreated into stories. But for most of human history, they were part of reality. People hunted them, feared them, wrote laws about them, and warned their children about them. The ancient world was not divided into real and imaginary the way ours is. It was divided into known and unknown, and in the unknown, monsters lived, whether dragons, giants, cyclopes, or sea beasts. These creatures were humanity's first attempt to understand a dangerous planet, and in many cases, they were not entirely wrong. Something was out there, it just wasn't what they thought it was.